My apologies for not joining you today, but thank you to Jono and the rest of the organizing team for the opportunity to share this short recording. So in this presentation, I will briefly reflect on 3 ways in which my work adopts a Southern orientation and what I understand as the implications of assuming this position. So over the last 3.5 years, I've been involved in a larger project, City Occupied, that aims to bring into conversation the practices and possibilities of land and building occupations in Cape Town, Bogota, and Sao Paulo. In undertaking this work with my colleagues Diana Sanchez-Betancourt, Andrea Scheba, and Nate Millington, we have adopted an approach that takes place seriously in shaping urban thought and practice. So the 3 elements that I believe are central to my work and the project more broadly relates to, firstly, the modes of engagement, secondly, an interest in advancing a comparative urbanism, and finally, a concern with vocabularies of practice. The work in Cape Town, where I've spent most of my time, is centered around Sisigu House. So in March 2017, the housing justice movement reclaimed the city, occupied an old state hospital that had stood largely vacant for 22 years, or more than 22 years, in the gentrifying neighborhood of Woodstock. The occupation of the space, which came to be referred to as Sisigu House, was initially a temporary politically motivated tactic by activists that included Reclaim the City and Difuna Akwazi in response to the sale of public land for the development of a private school. However, while initially carried out as a tactic to contest the lack of affordable housing in the inner city and ongoing gentrification, CGH has since become a home for roughly 1,000 residents or 338 families, most of whom were either evicted from their homes in Woodstock or nearby Salt River or were homeless, all of whom are no longer able to afford formal rental prices in the area. So in this work, we have been interested in asking how the experiences of Sisigu House may offer ways of thinking the present and futures of infrastructural politics in contemporary cities. So I'll briefly begin with speaking to modes of engagement. So in focusing on occupation, we have taken inspiration from Southern scholars who have argued for modes of theory and praxis defined by active immersion in rather than distant critical observation of complex and messy life worlds. A common imperative here is really to bridge gaps between researcher and researched and theory and praxis. So in this work that we have done in Cape Town, we have sought to co-produce knowledge outputs that offer solidarity to unfolding political struggles and to pay attention to their contribution to already unfolding efforts to imagine and make alternative life worlds that are quite central to the everyday labor that's taking place at Sisigu House. In this case, the notion of situated solidarities offered by Routledge and Derrickson does well in capturing our approach. The initial focus of our engagement was in documenting personal histories and existing practices to contribute to shifting the discourse around occupations and occupiers. One output from this process is a zine or mini magazine that captures the histories and brief reflections from 14 residents and developed as a portrait style output. A second output developed in collaboration with filmmaker Sarah Gouvier has been a short documentary that offers a glimpse into 3 occupations in Cape Town, Sao Paulo, and Bogota. All of this material can be found on our website, and I've provided the link below. So more recently, we've also been working with the leadership structures of Sisigu House to support developing a counter vision for the house. This is in response to the city's top-down vision of third-party managed social housing on the site. So in this process, we have been involved with other collaborators and through a process initiated within Sisigu House referred to as a co-design process. And it's been concerned to support both capturing the existing practices at the site and to advance imaginations and possibilities of the future for the site, but through conversation and capturing the visions of the residents themselves. But it's also worth noting that this process is unfolding within a context where the narrative of the occupation, specifically as it is coming from the political authorities within the city, is one of criminalization and disorder, and this has been contrasted to notions of proper citizenship. in air quotes, of those upholding law and order and that are patiently waiting for housing. So I don't have time to discuss this rhetoric, but I wanted to note that. Okay, I'm also going to now just briefly speak to another aspect of our work, which has focused really on comparison. So the project takes seriously the arguments by scholars such as Jennifer Robinson, but also Gillian Hart, for the importance of comparison or comparative urbanism that begins from somewhere to think elsewhere, and in the process support the development of revisable concepts across geographies. So it's about advancing tactics for a wider conversation, but across difference. And this has really been something we've been trying to gradually develop. And one of the current initiatives that we're involved in is a seminar series funded by the Urban Studies Foundation. The intent of the series is to bring together scholars and activists and NGO collaborators from northern and southern geographies to advance both conceptual and methodological approaches to the study of urban vacancy, occupation, and commoning, which you understand broadly. The series is grounded in the context of Cape Town, Sao Paulo, Bogota, Dublin, and Vienna. And it seeks to build on existing efforts by creating a space for mutual learning, for dialogue and solidarities across these southern and northern geographies. It's currently unfolding, we'll see how it goes, but it's really about this attempt, as I've said, to think from somewhere or begin somewhere to think elsewhere, and across geographies, across sites, to think across difference. I also want to just take some time to reflect on one more mode of practice, which is a concern with vocabulary. And this is really in response to Galton Barnes' provocation to advance calls for a vocabulary of Southern urban practice. And in response, we have been asking how thinking through Sissi House speaks to modes of city making that might offer alternative possibilities for thinking and making the city. So in a recently submitted paper, which I've co-authored with Nate Millington, we draw inspiration from an emerging scholarly interest in infrastructural repair, which very broadly can be understood as the necessary labor of sustaining and filling in the gaps of fragile systems of provisioning that would otherwise be abandoned or left to decay. Once again, here, Barnes' effort to advance a vocabulary of Southern urban practice is instructive. He offers the term repair as a practice in thinking about housing as a time, as a verb, as a process. So this approach really supports an understanding of occupation as both sites of ongoing social material struggle and allows for a linking of precarity, but also practice and possibility. So for us, we think of occupations as a practice that surfaces conflicting rationalities between different valorizations of land and infrastructure, and are really interested in occupation as a reparative practice. I can't go into the detail, but just to say that that's what we're paying attention to. We situate our reflection at Sissi House, and in paying attention to the labors of endurance at CGH, we advance an expanded conceptual framework of repair, conceiving of occupations as a reparative urban infrastructure that includes both material and affective practices. So through CGH, both thinking with and through CGH, we draw out a set of reparative practices that can be read as central to sustaining, to reclaiming, and to future making. And we name these infrastructural repair, prefiguration, defiant endurance, and refusal. So again, I don't have the time to really unpack the detail of these concepts, but it's really concerned. The point I'm trying to make is that we've been advancing these in response to this call to think about a vocabulary of Southern urban practice. What is also important to note in this case is that these concepts have really emerged out of and through conversations, engagements, and observations at Sissi House that have been ongoing since early 2020. Okay, so if I can just conclude. In offering these categories, we do so as a contribution to what we understand as the necessity of paying attention to and valorizing practices that are decolonial and reparative, as opposed to violent and dehumanizing in orientation. And furthermore, in thinking with and beyond Sissy House, we understand these lessons in more expansive ways. We have really been concerned to ask the question, what lessons can we learn from this site, Sissy House, about addressing past injustices and remaking urban futures? So if I can come back to this concern with Southern orientation, I think Libby Porter really captures it really well when she says, place matters for which questions are asked and for how they are answered. Taking seriously the refusal of being unplaced, therefore demands relational place-based practices of theorizing. This should mean more than thinking from place, but entails a more demanding thinking with place. And this has really been central to the work and the orientation that we have been trying to advance over the last few years. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share my work. It has been brief, and I hope that there has been some clarity and that it offers some food for thought for the remainder of your workshop. And I wish you every success with the remainder of the day. Thank you and bye.